Hey guys, Dino here with Overclockers Tech. So I got the Z77 FTW all fired up, and I thought I'd give you a quick tutorial on the BIOS here. When you first come inside of the UEFI BIOS, you're greeted with the Overview tab. Not a whole lot you can do here. You can just set the time and date and things like that. The rest of the screen is full of information on the different areas of the system, your CPU and whatnot, and it gives you some voltage readings, temperatures. Over on the Advanced tab is where you'll find your ACPI settings, and the onboard device configuration for your USB, eSATA, your LAN ports, audio, etc. SATA configuration. Under that, you're going to want to set it to AHCI mode, especially if you have an SSD that you're using. And then below that it lists out the drives that you have attached. You can see I've got a Kingston SSD and a DVD-ROM. You can enable or disable the rapid start technology, USB configuration, and you can enable or disable the self-test, smart self-test. And under the hardware monitor is where your smart fan settings are. You can either use smart fan, change it to auto, which gives you control of the fan speeds manually. And there's that ability for all 7 of the onboard fan headers. And here you can enable or disable the Smart Connect technology. Under the Chipset tab we have the System Agent configuration, and under that you'll find the onboard graphics settings if you decide to use the onboard graphics and have a CPU that supports that. And under here is some LCD control settings for the onboard graphics. And below that is your DMI configuration. And the Northgrid PCI configuration. There are some PCIe 3 settings in here, one of which is the root port presets. And another one is the endpoint preset. And finally the endpoint hint. And here you can enable or disable the memory thermal configuration. And the GT power management control has a couple of options. And under the ME subsystem, about all there is under here is the firmware update. If you won't ever have a chance or want to update the ME firmware, you would have to enable this part. And we'll skip past the overclocking. I'll come back to that in a minute. Under the boot menu, pretty standard fare here. You can set your hard drive priority and then the boot order. And security tab, if you want to set a BIOS password, this is where you do that. And everything's pretty standard in the save and exit area. The BIOS profile setup, you can go in and save a profile or load a profile. You can save up to 10 different profiles and name them. You can see I've got a couple set up in there right now I've been playing around with. And we'll go back over to the overclocking tab. Under the memory configuration, you have the profiles user defined means you're going to set your stuff manual or leave it on auto, or you can set your XMP profiles if your memory supports it. The memory clock multiplier, auto 133 or 100, and the limiter, you can set your memory speed all the way up to 3000. You're going to have to take that off of the auto setting if you want to get to the timings area where you can set your timings manually. If you leave it on auto, you can see the option to manually set them disappears. So if you have, let's say, 1600 memory, you set it to 1600, and then this auto right there becomes visible, for which you can change to manual, and then you can go down and change all your timings manually. And the CPU configuration gives you the information and also some throttling options, the C1E, and your virtualization if you want to enable that and have a CPU that supports it. Under the CPU power is where you're going to find all your C states, turbo mode, which you're going to want to leave enabled, the EIST, and the block settings. You can set in increments of 10 kilohertz up or down. And then the rest of this area is where you're going to set your CPU multiplier. If you put it on manual, then you can manipulate the multiplier up, down. This is your V droop. Intel spec is just that. Disabled turns off any V droop, or you can disable the V droop by percentage if you find that disabling it is making your CPU run at too high of a voltage. Then you may want to play around with the percentage values. The overclock mode, it disables all the unnecessary devices. So if you use that, you're going to get into Windows and none of your onboard stuff will be activated. It's purely for a benching station where you're trying to get a high benchmark score, or just put the screws to it and try to get as much as you can out of it. The performance tweak is supposedly advantageous when you're running certain programs. 3D Mark 03, I believe, was one of them that it's supposed to help if you're trying to get a good score on that. And the rest of it is voltage controls for the CPU and the memory and some of the subsystems. And that's it. When you're done making what you're going to do, you just hit Save Changes and Exit, and you're good to go. Well, thanks for watching the video, and I'll continue on with the review and run some benchmarks on this bad boy and see where it comes out. Thank you.